Welcome to Energize. The future is now. I'm Jason Mann with Jim Czek, and our special guest all the way from Ontario, joining us via our special webcam here is Dan McTeague. Dan was a Liberal MP for 17 and a half years, representing ridings near Toronto in the 90s and 2000s. Before becoming an MP, did PR for Toyota Canada, and also worked as an analyst for GasBuddy.com. And in 2019, became president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. So welcome to the show, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Jason and Jim. What an intro. Thank you for that. And
did we miss anything there?
I think you got it all. That was pretty good. I got to write that down and actually do that. Change my bio on Wikipedia to do just that. Very
We are actually fortunate enough that we held a conference here in Kelowna in 2019 prior to COVID called Level Up, and we had Jean Chrétien and Stephen Harper speak at the event. Both for now, it was on leadership. So we had Jean Chrétien share his thoughts on leadership and Stephen Harper as well. And we got to sit down and spend some time with both of them too. So it was great. And I read both their books.
That's 20 years worth of prime ministers right there. Incredible.
Yeah, great leadership from both of them. Some of the things that you're kind of like speaking out against are obviously the carbon tax and the phasing out of natural gas and stuff like that. Maybe just give us a little bio of what you're doing right now, like what Dan McTeague is up to.
Well, look, years of experience on the policy side and on the practical side have given me a bit of an edge in terms of understanding, what is coming at us. And it seems that you have a federal government and provinces as well that have no trepidation with, involving themselves in areas of policy and direction that I think are being done without much due regard to the consequences. And by that, I don't mean, hey, we're doing this for the environment or we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. I think a lot of it has to do with, governments more increasingly taking positions and moving ahead with policies that have significant impacts for Canadians, particularly on the affordability front, and not just energy. It spills over into other domains. I think for a long time, and I noticed this, as a member of parliament, I noticed this in my days at tomorrowsgaspriceday.com with Gas Buddy, that increasingly decisions are being made without much pushback. And it's nice to have people out there who are, champions of things and, the things can be done universally without any type of scrutiny. But there comes a point where someone has to speak out for those out there who are going to be impacted by this. And while intentions are good, and everybody has a different way of interpreting what intentions are, the effect hasn't been as welcome, I think, as many had anticipated. And for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been focusing more on when governments make policies, what are the consequences? And when you begin to scratch back the consequences, and with the expertise that I've had over the years, you start to realize that this is not something that I think every Canadian is going to sign up to, especially when, the fine print is you can expect to pay more and your life to become that much more difficult. And I think we've been spot on in terms of some of the policies that we've taken on. And of course, espousing those, not just with the view of, hey, what's gas prices tomorrow, but, what are the long-term consequences? And I think increasingly people are starting to realize that policy decisions made in a vacuum are great for the theoretical, for the professorial, for the educated, not so great when it comes down to ordinary people. And so that's where Canadians for Affordable Energy really was designed. It was started by a colleague of mine who is now a member of Parliament, conservative, but something I signed up to very early on because I thought it was important that we have at least the other side of the story. And increasingly, I think more Canadians are paying attention to that.
Yeah, energy is in everything we do, right? From the moment we get up to whatever we do, like what we're talking right now. And I like to use that example of a slice of bread and how that gets planted with a tractor, harvested with a tractor, shipped to a granary with a truck, and then ground up and all that kind of stuff. And you drive to a grocery store eventually to pick it up and then toast it. So energy is in everything we do. And the people that get hurt most when we're doing some of these things with taxes and stuff like that are the people that can least afford it.
Exactly.
The people that can, like if you have a lot of money, it's maybe an irritation to some people. And as well as, I can just relate one story, just kind of just humanize it a bit. I used to drive a 1-ton diesel. I was filling it up when diesel in Kelowna was around $2.15, and it was expensive. It was like $250 to fill up a truck. And a developer pump next to me said, "Hey, Jim," and then he said, "This is like," he was going on about how terrible this was because he was paying $250 to fill up his truck, and he's a very well-to-do guy. And I said, well, think of it this way, right? It's an irritation to you and I, but just think of the people that have to choose between what they're going to buy for groceries tonight and how much fuel they can put in their vehicle. And I think
Exactly.
that's really what's happening in Canada right now. And we're seeing that in grocery prices. We see people on social media reaching out and asking for help because, like food prices have gone through the roof and energies in everything that we produce and ship.
And we're early on, really, in terms of the mandate and the plans, right?
Yeah, and it's good to hear that you're a big fan of technology. Like you said, you told us prior to coming on that you drive or have driven a hybrid. You're one of the first guys to drive a Toyota hybrid.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I mean, I did the first cut lines in media relations for Toyota back in '92 on the Tsunami. You know what today is the Prius. And back then, I remember the cut lines very well. I still have reference to them. I still speak to a lot of my friends over there. This would be 30, 40, 50 year technology. And it proved to be, it's worth, it's everyone out there who has one, taxis in your province, people who use them leisurely here, but it's now every other manufacturer seems to have used that technology to, as it were, improve fuel efficiency and to get better mileage. For Canadians, it's not just the wide adoption and being more sensitive to better fuel standards and vehicles that make more economic sense. It's also that we happen to be an energy-rich country, an energy country with a diversity of energy menus that provide us what would otherwise be a strategic advantage. But when I look at the bottom line in terms of energy and its connection, very simple. A country like Canada, third largest provable reserves of oil in the world, the fifth largest when it comes to natural gas. I mean, look at, you're sitting on just northwest of you there, northeast of you, the Montney, some of the most richest energy dense areas in the world, and yet we're not exploiting them to the extent that we should. Countries are knocking on our door saying, hey, can you help? Germany, Japan, but we're saying there's no business case. It's a very, very important role to play at this point, because I think people tend to fail to understand that if we're not selling enough energy to the rest of the world, what are we selling? And it has a big effect on the depreciation of the Canadian dollar, which takes a third more to buy products that are priced in U.S. terms, which adds to inflation, which makes it difficult for people to make ends meet when it comes to the cost of gasoline, heating, and food. And of course, you have carbon taxes on top of that, which we can discuss later. But now 3 of them. The first one we know about in other provinces rebated, but going to 42, 41 cents a liter. Second one, the clean fuel regulation standard, which you've had here in BC, 17 to 20 cents a liter. And the third one, the caps on emissions. It's really becoming apparent that we're on a collision course between government policies and do-gooders and people's ability to afford heat or eat.
Yeah, because one of the big things, and we did a little research in British Columbia, only 20% of our electrical or our home heating comes from electrical. The rest of it comes from, 60% of it comes from natural gas, and then wood, oil, and propane make up the other bits of it. But how does there's really no alternative right now to say, because electricity is about 75% more expensive than natural gas.
Yeah, so it depends on where you are in the country. I mean, I come from a province where the hydrology isn't so great. The topography is that we have had to rely on nuclear reactors. My old riding as a member of parliament, you pointed out, was Pickering, home to the first commercial reactors in North America. And the critical part of that was building them wasn't just seen as, foreseeability. It certainly wasn't about climate change. It was about having a competitive advantage over other jurisdictions in the United States, as well as Canada, with cheap, reliable, abundant, base load energy. And Quebec, of course, has its hydro dams. To a lesser extent, the Maritimes have a combination of everything, although they're not able to get their stuff together. Manitoba, strong on hydro, whereas Saskatchewan, Alberta, and the interior BC, still using, to a large extent, natural gas, sometimes coal, and sometimes oil. The point is that to demonize one in order to favor another, really begs the question. If you think you can put all your eggs in one basket in a cold country like Canada, which has arguably, on an average, the coldest temperatures of any nation in the world, one can probably argue Mongolia, but that's sort of a different discussion from a different time. To put all your eggs in one electrification basket, well, you wind up with what they're seeing in the Maritimes today. For the past 3 days, anywhere from 60 to 120,000 subscribers, users are without power. How do your heat pumps work in that kind of circumstance? How do you get your charge for your electric vehicles in that circumstance? The reality is that I think we need a little bit of everything.
For sure. Um, One of the things that when I look at the climate action plan and that I seem to find things that don't make a lot of sense. Like, for instance, there's a big push for EVs, yet there's no connection to Tesla, who makes the best EVs. And then that they built their own energy or charging network, which is now shown to have failed across the US and Canada. And now most of the auto manufacturers are adopting the Tesla charging system. But why, if Tesla's the leader in the industry, why didn't they work with him instead of trying to do something themselves and having such a failure and such an investment of money that's gotten, I guess, a bit of a waste now too?
Well, I think car companies were goaded into having to do these things. They were told that mandates would be there, and then that's the stick. The carrot, of course, would have been billions of trillions of dollars being offered by the US government under the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's money to be had out there. Most of it is public money, and most of it is, unfortunately, borrowed public money. You can see where this is going, especially if the technology changes. I'm a let's do everything if we can. Let's have all the technologies out there. Let's use hybrid. Let's use plugins. Let's use BEVs. I mean, that the reality is that the more diverse a mix of opportunities you have, the better it is for consumer choice and the better it is for price. But I think rather than telling people what has to happen and to say building an EV is somehow good for the environment is absolute poppycock. It's a dishonest, misleading lie, very similar to the lie that was given just a few days ago by the Minister of Environment and Climate, Stephen Guilbeault, when he said you're going to be forced and coerced into driving EVs, but it's going to be better for you because you're going to save money. Well, even the government's own regulatory analysis says that's bunk. It's going to cost average of $17 billion net to the Canadian economy. So I guess what it comes back to is when it's all said and done, Tesla has been an early, developer and mover and has that sort of advantage. People buy their second Tesla because they know they're reliable to a large extent. But there is so much more to the issue of electric vehicles and to electrification, which is part of the net zero slogan mandate, which I think requires us to really step back and say, wait a minute. Do we have the money, much less the minerals, much less the ability to process, much less the ability to acquire the copper and cobalt and all the other products that are needed? And where are they currently being sourced? And how are they being made? If it's China made with coal, it defeats the whole point of being cool and trendy and saying that my EV is environmentally friendly.
And I'm a big believer in that we need to incentivize and also use technology and people decide for themselves if it's better. If EVs are better, and I believe they are, if EVs are better, people will make that choice. If they're cheaper, better, and faster, and all that kind of stuff, people will make it. You don't need to hit them over the head with a stick, because I believe the current path we're on, our legacy automakers here in North America will probably go bankrupt, because I don't think they're even close. I mean, I think I've seen a piece today that said half the Ford dealers don't even want to sell EVs next year because they said they can't sell the ones they have. And they're competing against Tesla that has, obviously, some experience in front of them. And I mean, I drive a Tesla, and I think it's one of the most amazing. I think it's a robot on wheels, right? I think that's the big thing between a Tesla and most other guys that are making battery cars or putting a battery in an ICE car. But I don't believe they're suited for everywhere in Canada. And if we look north of Kelowna and stuff, like, it's pickup country, right? And there's nobody that makes pickups right now, including Tesla, at scale that would replace all of our pickup trucks. And it's kind of crazy to say that, because I mean, most people in Canada, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of pickup trucks and SUVs, right? So how do you replace those?
Yeah, well, that's it. And let's talk about the density of the energy. I mean, I talked about renewables a little earlier, but if you're having to look, I have this little phone. Everyone has one. I'm in Milton, Ontario, which is just northwest of Toronto. It's about -2 out here today. If I'm staying in the home or in the office, this little phone will probably last a good 18, 17 hours with regular use. If I put it outside, I guarantee you in 4 hours I come back, there'll be no more battery. Your point is very clear. If you're close to the facilities that can permit you recharging, if it's city driving, and I'm not so concerned about range anxiety because I think they get over that. It's the infrastructure to build these things that does concern me, Jim and Jason. What my other problem is, if you look at the cost of a public charger, which is of course covered to a large extent by government, $200,000 to $250,000 for one charger. A charger that on a fast charge uses 100 times more than what an average use of a house would be. It means we have an infrastructure issue, a very serious one. In a previous life with my father, built homes and subdivisions. And I can tell you right now, go to any municipality, they are guarding their transformers as if they are, gold. There just isn't enough of the materials needed to achieve what the government is demanding, and that everybody be in vehicles that, or at least be sold. The only vehicle that can be sold is electric vehicle in 2035. Even enthusiasts in the industry, Flavio Volpe, have said this is not workable. This is not reasonable. The timelines are way too tight. And I think for a lot of people, using my old company, Toyota, they're saying, we're not even going to go that route. Yeah, we'll be forced to do it because our pension holders and all the trendies out there want us to do this. But we've got new technology that is going to upend this. And with that, potentially make the $50 or $60 billion of your public money being invested, a non-starter before it even begins. And, by 2028, we could be looking at Toyota comes out with a vehicle that they say will have a range that's double that of anyone that's currently available in the current battery technology. I think it's a game changer, and I think it's going to happen.
Where do you think this will ultimately go? I mean, there are a lot of reasons, a lot of road bumps, but the government seems to be hell-bent, and there seems to be a lot of passion behind it. Do you have a sense?
Well, I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, this would have been a slam dunk. Everybody would be in favor of it. Now you're getting people saying, wait a minute, bottom line, I can't afford this. And it's nice that I, as a person making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, can't afford one of these things, generally speaking. Not useful for the kind of work that I do. But I'm going to subsidize you, Dan McTeague, the fat cats and others who've got big fat pensions from the government. I'm going to subsidize you so you can ride around in your cool vehicles. And they're great vehicles. I agree with you, Jim. I'd buy one if it weren't for the fact that I'm still dealing with some of the old ones I have here. But I think for most people, it's what does this really mean for me? And I think you're seeing increasingly discontent in the country that in order to achieve that so-called net zero and to get everybody in electric vehicles, you're punishing the wrong people. The very people that Justin Trudeau said since 2015, people who want to get people who are in the middle class and those fighting hard to join it, something like that. That shtick goes out the window very quickly when people realize that just in the past year alone, more and more people are in fact leaving the middle class. More and more people are feeling, punished by a government that says, you will do these things and you will enjoy what you're doing. I think increasingly there's this disconnect, which leads me to the ultimate, in my experience as a Liberal MP for 18 years, half of that as a minister responsible for Canadians abroad, and half of that my life as working in the trenches of the Liberal Party. This is no longer the party of the center, and I believe that they will go down. And I think the polls will confirm that. But for some time, their disconnect with reality and people's ability to make ends meet is going to deliver them an extraordinarily punishing result in 2025. And I think the NDP will also join them as well. Meaning, all eyes have to be on what Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives have planned, because they can't just walk in and say, well, we're going to be liberal light, we're going to do a little bit less. They have to be very clear about articulating a policy that is, in my view, not looking before you leap.
Yeah, so what I would have identified as a liberal in the past, I mean, Jean Chrétien would have been my political hero, if you want to make any politician a hero. And I think Jason says the same thing. We believe that we were kind of more liberal-minded for sure, but then the left moved. I don't know where they moved. They almost moved all the way around the clock or something. And it just left many of us wondering, like, what's going on. And it seems to be oblivious, no empathy. Like some of the questions when asked of our finance minister and that they don't even answer the questions. And I believe our media has done us a disservice by not holding power accountable and asking tougher questions, because we see it in the stats. Food bank usage through the roof. People are housing poor, scared to lose their homes. employment income has not gone up with what inflation has gone up, and yet the Bank of Canada talks how we got to tamp down employment, right? It's. I mean, they made the statements and said we have to reduce the raises, yet, and it seems like. And I'm going to jump around a bit here. When they said to us, "Don't worry about, we're not going to raise interest rates. You can go ahead and take out that mortgage," and then 2 years later they raise it 20-fold.
Yeah, I mean, that's critical.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of disheartening for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people have lost hope and understanding. We can see it in the polls, I guess. But I think if our media, national media, would do a better job holding power accountable, we'd be in a better place today.
Where do you fall in terms? I mean, yeah, there's this dynamic of maybe people who have been on the planet a little bit longer and have seen things and maybe have had a little bit more experience. But then there's this younger generation that's maybe coming up and they really see like the impact of climate change that's happening. And maybe there's a bit of, I don't know, you could almost say hysteria built in around this. What do you say to those folks, though, that are really worried about the future of the planet and the climate, and how slowing down the adoption of EVs and net zero type vehicles would have on the environment? Do you have any insights or thoughts on, in terms of those folks?
Trudeau's strongest cohort when he was elected in 2015 was the 18 to 30-year-olds. It is diametrically opposed now. He has completely lost that. And in fact, those are either going to some extent NDP, but to a large extent conservative. So, I think there is a point where you continue to, for lack of a better term, indoctrinate children, that when they do grow up and they start to sense, they're more sensible and sensitized to the world, that they're looking at the very teachers that put this as part of the curriculum, doing very well by their pensions. Many of those pensions, by the way, invested in coal, oil, and other, nasties, according to what they've done. We have not done a very good job in this country at selling who Canada is. We've not told people the story that we've just shared now about, energy diversity and the needs for energy for the long term, and that the planet has done extraordinarily well. I mean, yeah, we're not perfect, but countries like Canada have led the way in terms of reducing real pollution. The point is that it's been very successful. The marketing campaign of climate change has been extraordinarily successful, except that I think generation after generation, year after year, it's proven to be untrue. That's not to say that we aren't seeing changes. It's not to say we're not seeing wildfires or we're not seeing hurricanes, but we've always seen these. It's just that our sensitivity to those things has been disproportionate, I think, to the realities of everything else about us. And I think we're starting to see a bit of a change in that as people are starting to, the kids are coming home saying climate, climate, climate. The parents are saying, how are we going to pay this bill? How are we going to put food on the table? So I think that's where whoever can bridge that, and I think Pierre Poilievre is probably doing a very good job of that, saying we have responsibility for that, but we can't do it by making people poor, and we can't make it by making people feel that the country, the dream of Canada, is quickly slipping away. And you're not going to do it by virtue signaling. You're not going to do it by identity politics. You're not going to do it by old modes of idealism around postmodernism or critical theory. Canadians, I think, are looking for what they got under Jean Chrétien, what they got under, to a lesser extent, Brian Mulroney, is that, we will provide you our best opportunity as government. But, that's going to take a little bit of Canadians, getting on board as well and saying, these are the priorities that we're looking for. We want to make sure we have a healthcare system that's sustainable. We want to make sure that we have, to the extent possible, migration, which is manageable. We're not bringing in a flood of people that we know we cannot. And I see them here in my community here in the northwest part of Toronto. We can't have tent cities in a cold country like Canada. You see it in Kelowna. I see it here in Toronto. Something has come undone. It's come unhitched. And I think whoever's very successful in saying, I don't have all the answers and government can't do everything, but here's how we get there, is going to win. Very similar to what I saw in 1993 when I was running as a Liberal candidate. We didn't say we have the magic bullet for everything, where things are going to go better. We created something. Our platform was creating opportunity. And we said, we have a plan. Okay, this is how we're going to go. Right now, Canadians want more of the same. And I think that's the fatal flaw for the Liberals in the next 22 months. Unless they can really turn things around, it's going to be someone else that's going to have to come forward with that. Despite the age, those of a different age are saying, hey, we want to enjoy our future as well, too.
We had the president of a mining company on here, JDS Mining, here just recently. And Canada is one of the richest nations in the world when it comes to mining and oil and gas and all that stuff. But we seem to be ashamed of our resources or want to like push them down. But if we look at the Toronto Stock Exchange, most of the bigger companies on the TSX are still heavily weighted towards resources, and that'll be oil and gas and our mining companies. A lot of our big miners here in Canada actually have gone abroad because they find it tough to open mines here in Canada. I know IM Gold is opening up the Cote mine in Ontario and stuff like that. Ontario seems a little friendlier, and Quebec seems very mining friendly. But how do we? Young people love their cell phone, the iPhone, which is full of gold, silver, copper, lithium, silica, and we could go on and on and on, right? That is basically and powered by energy every day, right? That has to be charged. But I think there's a disconnect from how Canada was built. And if you look at most northern communities in Ontario too, Tumbler Ridge, all those places are built out of resources, whether that be lumber, oil and gas, or mining. People didn't move up to Tumbler Ridge and Fort St. John because the weather was better, right? They moved up there because of our resources. Yet this current government seems to want to shut down all those industries.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're mining, and that's the way we have to go because we don't have enough copper to meet the surge in demand for net zero. Where are you going to get it from? The current go-to is let's let China, make it for us and buy our resources and our technology to do it. But I think there's a more critical point is that, try to get a mine approved in Canada. You alluded to it, 7 to 10 years, 10 and 15 years by the time it gets up and running. Those timelines are way beyond the best enthusiastic aspirations of governments that say we can make all these changes in the next 24 months or the next 4 years. There is a significant, chasm between reality and what the governments have been doing to prevent, to stymie, and to allow every Tom, Dick, and Harry to come in and oppose things that are absolutely indispensable to the standard of living that Canadians have enjoyed and will continue to enjoy. And natural resources, like it or not, is going to be here. The question I think we have to ask is this. If we want all of our renewables to be built by China and other countries, because we don't like them being done in our own backyard, because we're concerned about the environmental implications, and we can somehow, send these to another country, and we don't have fossil fuels, we don't extract them, we have no more hydrocarbons coming out, so we're reliant on OPEC. How does a country maintain itself? How are we going to present and preserve for the future a standard of living that they should rightly expect? It seems to me that the policies don't take into account. They're very silo-oriented, and too much of being one without considering the other is the main reason why Canada's finding itself in so much trouble. And many people are saying, if this government survives past 2025, we're packing up and going. I think I believe it. And it's not just oil and gas. It's not just mining. It's not just farmers saying you cut back our nitrogen. How the heck are we going to be able to produce what we've produced in the past? Or carbon taxes on drying grain and whatnot. In my country, part of the world here. I mean, I'm within eyesight of the Ford plant here in Oakville. I'm in Milton, but I can see the stack from where I am. It's if you're going to kill that into the manufacturing sector as well, you have very little left. And I think Canadians have to have a sober adult discussion about the country's priorities, like it or not.
So based on your experience, I'd like to ask you this question. It seems to be a very unpopular government with the people right now, like with the people in general. And it's held together with a coalition. And the media doesn't seem to want to hold it to account. How do Canadians, maybe in the future, or how does anybody force an election, or how do we find a path forward? Because I think a lot of people, and most people, if you ask nowadays, are you better off or worse off in the past 8 years? And I would say, if you've had the wheel for 8 years, you've been driving the car for 8 years, you can't blame somebody else for all the stuff you've run over.
Well, I think the government has, as we used to say years ago, lost the moral authority to govern. There's no doubt, and that includes the NDP. And they can cling to power, but I mean, as the longer this goes on, more the pain and the more obvious the inevitable outcome will hit parties. The question parties have to ask is whether they want to survive this. If we go back to 2011, when I was defeated, the party came back as a completely different party. It was never the same. The party of the center completely disintegrated and disappeared. And if that's the lurch to the left, that liberals believe that they will continue to be a winning combination, even with the narrowest of margins, sooner or later that strategy comes to an end. And I think pragmatic politics starts to kick in, and the survivability and new ideas, new folks. The biggest problem I think that the liberals face today, the Trudeau liberals, is that they have no experience. They got rid of all the smart old guys who've been around for quite some time. And yeah, you don't want people who are too old involved in politics. There was a lot of ageism, but what they actually did is got rid of the institutional intelligence that would have helped them guide them through some pretty difficult times. And the first pitfall would have been pre-2020 COVID, where the federal government was spending like drunken sailors, even though they didn't have to. Those were times traditionally where you fill up the silos and make sure that you have the kind of money so that some kind of inevitability takes place. A very good friend of mine quit in 2019 as a Liberal member of Parliament, mostly because of that. I won't mention their name, but we're shocked that the Liberal Party had abandoned those kind of fiscal principles that were hard earned. We almost lost our country's finances in the 1990s. I think for the next generation and for the next few years, the focus will have to be on, what works for the country and where does the country wind up. No one's bothered to say this is where we are and this is where we should be. It's more following dictates from international organizations. I don't think for a moment, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I've worked and served the government in foreign affairs, but I don't think we should be, making announcements on public policy at international forum of the United Nations. I think the place to do that is in the House of Commons. And I think more importantly is to have that, do your field work, get out there and talk to Canadians about the policies you want. We don't see that anymore. And I think that's where the government and its policies are dramatically failing because they fail the test of public acceptance.
Do you think maybe they make those announcements there because they have a warmer audience to it, as opposed to they make that announcement here? It's like not met with the same round of applause.
I think they're trying to appease a constituency that we shouldn't be getting involved with. Mm-hmm. I can't see why we'd be involved with the World Economic Forum. I mean, frankly, to me, if there are places for that, OECD, you have, international fora, you have the way of engaging at the ministerial level. But going in and having Klaus Schwab come out and tell us how we should live our lives and, having a bunch of rich people show up in jets at Davos every year just to be cool and trendy and be, indoctrinated or told what you should be thinking. It seems to me that this is the very thing that is feeding the cynicism the public has in our institutions. You notice how I haven't mentioned issues like freedom. I haven't mentioned issues like the concern that Canadians increasingly are having about quality of life or about migration. What I've tried to focus on, what I think we need to focus on is legitimacy in policies first with Canadians. And if it doesn't stand the test of time, then forget it. I spent a lot of time as a member of Parliament passing private members' bills. I was very successful at it. Made first MP and only MP I know, backbencher, who changed the criminal code, high-speed chases, pursuits, and a number of others. And not to toot my own horn, but there was so much that was never covered in campaigns that members of Parliament found their role to be able to be a little bit more nimble and find things that were of concern to Canadians. We don't see that anymore. The rigidity of MPs' inability to speak for their constituents or speak on behalf of issues that are not part of the center or the core is significant, and it shows a weakness in our democracy, and feeds into the view that whether it's media or whether it's the institutions that govern our country, people are becoming less enchanted and tuning out.
The reason that we do this show we called Energize is because we believe that the richest nations in the world have energy, whether that be oil and gas or minerals, and some of the poorest nations in the world have a lack of energy, right? So. And having a blend of energy, I think part of the good thing is about the EV movement and hybrid and all that they do rely on more of our mining sector instead of just precious metals. So we do be able, like our copper and all those other things are now nickel. Nickel's a big one, Voisey Bay and all that. Those are minerals that are so important to the future. And I think that's the message that we need to get out there, because countries like Dubai, I mean, all their citizens are richer. And in here in Canada, we have people that can't afford a home. I mean, young people, I talk to young people all the time. We have lots that work for us. There used to be when we were growing up, you were going to own a home at some point, but most young people now don't think they ever have the possibility of owning a home. So how do we bring that dream back, I guess?
Yeah, I guess I'm of two minds on that, because there was a time when previous generation to mine never had the opportunity to buy a home either. Yes, they did, but I mean, housing is extraordinarily important. But the reasons it has been for the inflation of the cost of housing that has made it prohibitive for many is, as Polyev has discussed, the gatekeepers, the time it takes to get an approval for a building permit, much less a subdivision. I did have some experience in that in an earlier part of my life. The fact that there are too many people looking for the same product, of which the cost has gone through the roof, that we have allowed a significant amount of people from abroad to buy into our housing stock. At one point, before and during COVID, the only major capital inflow into Canada was housing. That's where the money was going. It wasn't going to oil and gas. It wasn't going to natural resources. It wasn't going to manufacturing. It wasn't going to farming or mining. You have to, consider the absolute, paramountcy of migration in terms of our housing policy. It's good to say that you'll build all these homes under the Canada Mortgage Housing mandates, but at the end of all of this, it still is almost impossible to get a subdivision built here. You have NIMBYism. You have people saying you have to stack people on top of the other. However you do it, there are a lot of issues to unpack with respects to housing and why it's become unattainable for many, even when interest rates were 3 and 4% compared to my time. And I worked for my first break on Parliament Hill was a guy named Paul Cosgrove. For us old folks, that was the guy who was minister responsible for housing through CMHC when we had 21% interest rates in August of 1981. I'm really dating myself. But that's the kind of circumstance we find ourselves in today, where the housing stock is not being incentivized. And I'm not talking rentals and things like that, but it's impossible to work your way through the maze and the finances you need to put a stick in cement and to get a roof over your head. To do that, we need a much more sober approach of people who are in the know as to how to do it. Because right now, you've got a lot of wants, but very few who understand how this industry works.
Yeah, obviously, supply and demand are metrics you cannot ignore. If you add 1.5 million people to our already stretched housing market, obviously that's going to cause more strain on that housing market.
Jim, I give you an example. 2015, a sheet 5x8 tongue and groove was $15.97 at your local hardware store. It's now $92. Yeah. Iron steel to hold up the house, running roughly a third more than it was just in 2020. Same thing for cement. The point is that why are the costs high as they are? And there's a myriad of reasons for that. In the case of cement and other things, you can't ignore government policy with respects to restricting the product. And that's not to say, taxing it is one thing. It's also who's in charge, who's providing these things. And yes, the demand has gone through the roof, but the supply too has been to a large extent. We've seen the attenuation of competition in this industry on a scale that is frightening and very few people are talking about.
The one, you're in government, or you were in government. The one that I found interesting just recently when we're talking about pricing, grocery stores making record profits, and then the Trudeau government steps in and says that he's going to ask them to freeze the prices at the high levels and then have them collaborate on pricing, which is what I thought we were trying to get them not to do, is have more competition, because we just, I think some of them just paid some fines for bread fixing and fixing the price of milk and stuff like that. I found that odd.
Well, look, I didn't know we were going to raise this issue, but I'm going to show a little PR here. Mm-hmm. Background on the impact of mergers in the grocery industry. Dan McTeague MP. Look at the date.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Better done that. And I pulled this out only because I deal with folks that are in the industry and saying that is a horse you let out of the barn a long time ago, competition. When we allowed a handful of players to dominate the market and bid the farewell of all these smaller players, what we actually did was create a circumstance in which these larger stores serve as gatekeepers. You want to get your product on the market, there's no independence left. You either do it through Walmart or Costco or Loblaws or Save On, whatever, across the country. And this attenuation, this narrowing of competitors, has a lot to do with this. But the big elephant in the room for me, has always been energy, and that's aside from the fact that the federal government's own solution is Dan McTeague's bill, which was C-201, which was to bring about the efficiencies defense. It's hard to unscramble eggs. Once the damage is done, very difficult to try to bring it back. One of the things the federal government can and should be doing is what the Conservatives have proposed, C-234, remove carbon taxes from food at any and all stages. And I don't mean just the exemption because you happen to be a farm, but I alluded to it earlier, which is the drying of grain or any other product, the natural gas you use or the propane that you're using is taxed. And that tax cascades its way through the economy. Even the Bank of Canada was reluctant to discuss it, but the food expert Sylvain Charlevoix took on the Bank of Canada and realized and found, and for everybody, that the de facto effect of carbon taxes on food was substantial and not to be ignored. That's not to say it's a be-all, end-all. But I think the federal government needs to step up and be honest long before prescribing and pointing fingers at everybody else. And Jagmeet Singh going around trying to make hay of it, doesn't know how to build a house, much less understand how the grocery industry works. Maybe he should be looking at the federal government's policies on raising the price artificially. And by the way, blocking pipelines is one of the main reasons why the Canadian dollar is as weak as it is. That's adding 1/3 to the cost of every commodity we use in this country. That includes food, whether it is made here or whether it's shipped in from California. A weak Canadian dollar, because Canadians have said yes to blocking pipelines. Your province knows that as well as others. You have old premiers, ironically then worked for coal companies before they were shipped off to Germany, saying we'll use every tool in the box to block a pipeline that would have probably, among others, helped to bring down or strengthen the value of the Canadian dollar and help us with respects to the cost of food and shelter and everything else. It's not lost on me that these kind of things are very much the result of a federal government that is working at cross purposes while wanting to distract us to say it's those nasty grocery stores.
How many times are you getting a call from national media to provide a different point of view to when another platform is rolled out? How many calls are you getting?
Zero.
Yeah, that would be
same ones that want my information when it comes to gas pricing. So there are some media I simply won't deal with. I won't mention names, but because they're so far down the road of this, and this is part of the the concern that I think people have. Our institutions are not credible because they're in many respects bought. And I don't mean to say that disparagingly. I mean that truthfully. I never would I think of a day where media, gives good press and cover to a government that they're beholden to. I mean, the old expression, the old maxim we use is in politics is perception is reality. And whether you do it or not.
In the media industry, I think we're going down the same path, and we're feeling the pain ourselves. We're independent.
Yeah.
Bill C-18 seems to be like, we figured out a way to work with Facebook. We put our stuff there willingly. We never asked for a penny from Facebook. It's a symbiotic relationship for us. And everybody, including CBC, CTV, put their stuff there willingly. Facebook does not steal content. People willingly put it there. Google steals content, and they made a deal. But it seems like it's a way to stifle off media because, like I said, we found a way to work with it because Facebook and Instagram are our biggest audiences. They've taken that away from us, so now we kind of try to fight it out. But we've seen a paper in Kamloops fold just I think 2 months ago, and they said Bill C-18 was the reason that they're going under, and they basically closed down completely digital and their paper. So less independent voices obviously is easier to manage, a couple of big ones that are definitely getting a lot of money from the government. And I mean, we don't get any. It seems like, it's just like the grocery when you say there's a lot of independent grocers, there's lots of competition. And now there's only a few grocers and maybe in Canada, there'll be a few media outlets left too.
Well, yeah, I mean, Pravda looks like the new routine in Canada, and monopolies are us. This is not a Trudeau thing only or last government because this was a long time coming. The MacDonald Royal Commission of 1985 talked about winners and losers, and that country had to belly up to meeting global competition. In order to do so, it had to accept, a significant decline in the amount of competitors right across every industry you can imagine. I'm not so sure that experiment worked out very well, but I believe that if you create an uneven playing field in which those are struggling to get their message out, don't have the financial means to stay, in the loop, then you wind up with only regurgitation of one side, and usually what the government wants. There are exceptions, of course, you being one. I'm thinking here, Blacklock's reporter in Ottawa, which will not knuckle down to the government and has to fight them every inch of the way, access to information and whatnot. But there is truth to the idea that there is an eclipsing, not just of public's availability of diverse opinions, but the inability or unwillingness of members of parliament to raise these issues, to speak out, save and accept what their party tells them. I don't want to make this about me and about party discipline, but I think party discipline is so rigid now. It makes, members of parliament, as Pierre Elliott Trudeau said, nobody's 50 feet away from the House of Commons. Worse, it doesn't really reflect the kind of democratic, diversity, the dynamic of our democracy that we expect, with people, having it out on the floor of the House of Commons and getting good policy passed that reflects some of the concerns of Canadians. To the media, to the issue of C-18 and its protagonist, the person proposing this, Pablo Rodriguez. I sat with the industry committee for 4 or 5 years. I shake my head every day that he's minister. He got it obviously he got it very wrong, spectacularly wrong. But there they are, doling out public money to continue to win favor with some media that will do just that.
Can we bring it back full circle? I just want to ask a question around the electrification of the country and the goals that we have. I understand that you see it as a blended approach. That would be more reasonable. And let's just say we can escape the economic pressure of the next couple of years that we're going to face and have money to buy electric vehicles and everything else. Where are you at in terms of the potential baseload and grid that we're going to need to do this? Is it even possible? There's some people on one side that say it's not, but it's doable and we can get there. And there's some that are saying absolutely not.
I think the question is better, answered by saying, to get wherever we want, we need the time, the technology to get there. I mean, there's laws of thermodynamics and economics that are at play here, and they're substantial. When RBC comes out and says to electrify 80% of Canada is going to cost $2.5–3 trillion, that's our economy over the next year and a half, everything that we do. And I don't think that's practical. To get where we want to go, I think the Canadian way is always, bring in all elements of the great things that you do. Don't try to put all your eggs in one basket. A hurricane hits Nova Scotia, knocks out all the towers, or Ottawa and Toronto see a big storm, ice storm that takes out all of the electrical grid, or we have a solar event, Carrington, I think they refer to it as, where, all of our, everything goes down. You at least want some form of backup or some other alternative that can be readily dispatchable. And this is the problem. I don't think people understand electricity well enough that there's two factors that are critical. You have base load. Thing keeps running 24/7. You got that power when you need it. But then you get cold weather and suddenly you need to reach out more and you can't get that. So you need peak power. It can also happen in reverse when it's extremely hot outside. You need more air conditioners or more computers, wherever the case may be. To do that, your windmills and your solar panels don't have the density of energy to respond to that need. And you could actually wind up critically hurting people or creating energy blackouts or brownouts. So I think we have to be very careful and deal with what is realistic rather than trying to say, this is how the world is going to be. I think it's great to have aspirations and then to have, these goals and these dreams. But the problem is if you confine them to a particular time and say it has to be done by this date, as we're seeing from the federal Liberals, you have to have every EV by 2035, and you have to have an emissions cap put in place by 2030 that is 38% below 2019. That's political science, and that has nothing to do with reality.
And I think that's what Danielle Smith is saying right now. She's saying, hey, we're not disagreeing on that we should have some targets. We're just disagreeing on the timeline.
Well, yeah, that might be her point. I think the point is rather, whether even those things are achievable. And you say at the end of the day, for political reasons, I don't want to, say net zero is a ridiculous thing. But I think increasingly the world is moving away from the idea that we can somehow control CO2, therefore we can control temperature. And I think for more and more people that are out there, there are competitive factors here. You're not just dealing with one. For the longest time, it was about climate and nothing else. You had a bit of smattering of health and other things, but it's climate, 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 climate. It's all you hear from people. At the end of all of this, I think what people are looking for is some balance. And it comes down to that big question of, can we achieve all these things? How do we do that? We have a pretty good idea where we want to go, but we can't be rushed in doing it, especially since the technology is not there to get us there. You get rid of all the fossil fuels tonight, and for the next 10 years, you're going to leave a lot of people starving. You're going to leave a lot of people dead in a cold country like Canada.
Yeah, we did a story the other day that showed I think the Salvation Army did a survey, and it listed where, the priorities for most people. And then I also did it with AI. I did it with Grok, the X AI, and asked it what Canadians' priorities are. And climate was not in the top 5. But inflation definitely was in the top 1 for both, right? So, and I think that's what's on people's minds. They can't afford to feed their families. They can't afford to make their payments, and they're living off credit cards and all those kind of things. And those are stressful environments for people, and those hurt families, because whenever you have financial stress in a family, that also causes stress in the family unit as itself, right? But
yes.
What I do want to say is, we don't want to keep you past an hour, but I think we could probably talk to you for hours and hours, and we'd love to have you back. Is there anything you'd like to say, or what you see for the future, or what hope Canadians can have for a better tomorrow?
I think the pendulum is swinging in Canada, and I think more people are becoming more focused on, making ends meet. And as they do so, they're also demanding of their leadership that they also obey, the laws of reality. And I think there's a realism that's now being infused, not to diminish what has been attempted or to say it didn't work or it did work. But I think a lot more people are going to say, give me the meats and potatoes here. Tell me what we need to do and how you're going to achieve that. So I'm somewhat optimistic, and more so than I've been in quite some time, because I now see the public has finally turned. For the longest time, it felt like I was screaming at a wall, telling people the issue of affordability and the country's short-sighted policies would lead to a dead end. No one believed that. But I think things have changed since the summer. And increasingly, I think Canadians are very confident that there can be a change. And importantly, there's an appetite for that change. I think Canadians are going to become re-engaged. You won't see one of these things where they don't bother voting in elections. I think more and more people, more than being discouraged, which is what happens with grinding poverty many are now experiencing, are now committed. And I think it's that kind of environment that I think is very, very bodes very well for the future.
And that's the hope that we've noticed as well. Because one of the big things that I noticed is Pierre's got his messaging out there, Polyev, and then now I see the Trudeau Liberals are speaking that message back to him. They're more talking about his messaging than their own messaging right now. So I think that in itself is shows that there's a shift, and you can see it in the polls as well.
They're running out of ideas on the federal Liberal side, and they don't have the wherewithal to make the shift. So what you're going to see there, and I think we're likely to see an election before 2025. My personal conviction is that Trudeau can't stay, and sooner or later the Liberal caucus will throw him out. They are looking at the numbers. There's 140, 150 of them right now. They're going to be reduced to 50, maybe even 40. Most of them are going to say, it's you, it's me, or it's the team. And I think this time, Justin, you have to take one for the team. We've been with you, loyal, with very few exceptions. So I think we're going to be going to the polls a lot earlier. I think 2024, it may be fall of 2024, there will be a federal election, and there will be a pretty big correction in terms of the political outlook in this country. And well before we do, maybe our next opportunity to talk again, I think you're going to see a very different.
How do you think we'll get there? Because wouldn't it be in their best interest to kind of hang out and hang in there as long as possible? Or do you think there'll be pressure from the NDP side, or how will it come about?
So February 29th, Justin Trudeau takes a walk in the snow in Ottawa. There's a leadership convention slated for May of this year. The new government will want to go and test that mandate of the new leader no later than September. So we have an election by October, November of 2024.
Okay. We'll look forward to that.
Well, I thank you, Dan, for your time. It was an interesting discussion, and I hope to have it again.
I'm looking forward to this again, Jason and Jim. It's been a real pleasure, and these are great issues. And just when we come back and do this again, I'm sure the topics will change a little bit, but the outlook hopefully will be as hopeful and as optimistic as I think it will be.
There you go. Thank you again.
All right. That's Dan McTeague of AffordableEnergy.ca, former MP, and some insights there.
Former Liberal MP.
Yeah, former Liberal MP. And one that's had a lot of experience in this area. So on many different fronts.
Till next time, let's get charged up.
All right. Have a great day.